in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv with Solvinur Event. I'm sounding a bit hesitant because all of a sudden Skype is active. It's the 23rd of May 2015, 10 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, 4 p.m. in the Netherlands. Contact me. Hold on. There. That should be better. All right. Should be okay now. Still, it's strange. Yeah, that's it. Yep. Solvinur, the number 2, at yahoo.com. So, is the sound still bad? I sure hope not. Should be okay. So if you want to contact me via email, you can do that. If you want to ask questions or want me to look at certain things that you want to have on the radio, you can go for that. If you want to be on the radio, that's also not possible. You have to contact me via Skype at Solvinur, Solvinur. So, let's start by rolling a ciggy, shall we? Welcome everybody in the chat. You can get there by going to ucy.tv. That's 3 letters, ucy.tv, and find the chat room link. to talk to other people. There's already some people there. 8 Hawks is there. Welcome, buddy. Anon 37. Jules just came in. Dog seems to be there. Vince and Hans Dietrich. Listener and Gringo and 2 Anons. Welcome, everybody. So, there we go, Shecky. Let's touch Shecky. Let's see if we can finish this PDF today. The Most Dangerous Superstition by Lark and Rose. So you can still ask questions, doesn't have to be on topic. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat for that. You all got some coffee or something? So, this is in the middle of a paragraph, so it's a bit harsh starting, but even when each person's behavior is guided by his own imperfect, incomplete understanding of right and wrong, the overall results would be drastically improved compared to the authoritarian alternative, in which basically good people do things they know to be wrong, because they feel compelled to do whatever authority tells them to, right? As demonstrated by the Milgram experiments. Again, though many people falsely assume that a society without a centralized rule-making authority would mean every man for himself, group coordination and agreements do not require authority. And those children who spend their formative years learning to interact with different people of all ages on a mutually voluntary basis, instead of learning to blindly do as they are told, are far better equipped to form relationships and enter into joint efforts based upon agreement, compromise and cooperation. Such voluntary interaction can take place between 2 people or between 2 million. Even the limited freedom experienced by Americans has demonstrated that even extremely complex industries can be based entirely upon the willing participation and voluntary cooperation of everyone involved. And history has also demonstrated that the moment a method of organization based upon centralized coercive control is used, such as occurred in so-called planned economy, productivity crashes and poverty and enslavement appear. Yet most children are still raised in authoritarian environments with the claim that that will best prepare them for life in the real world. In truth, it prepares them only for a lifetime of enslavement. Yes. You could say those things are the same thing, right? Prepare for life in the real world. Speaking from a non-awake point of view, we would call that life in a dream world, right? The American dream, right? Halfway there is the next heading. In any group of people that has given up the authority myth, whether they are just a small group of friends or the inhabitants of a town or the population of an entire continent, the frequency and severity of violent conflicts and acts of aggression inside that group will be dramatically lower than it is elsewhere, where most people, by way of voting and or political actions, advocate and perpetrate aggression on a regular basis. Yes, and all this is Lark and Rose. though the individuals in such a group would have little fear from each other, they still would like to have to deal with acts of aggression. Yeah, Anon says it's anti-statist in the chat. It goes even further than that. You know, a statist bases the fact that he's a statist on authority. The authority is the more deeper reason for a statist to exist. Right? You get that from a Dutch site, Anon? That's interesting. Are you Dutch? Anon 37? Because I'm really wondering, where did you get that from a Dutch site? For people that don't know, it says www.mensenrechten.org, which means human rights. Right? Mensenrechten, human rights. Right? So it's the belief in authority which underlies the statist's point of view. So it's anti-authority, I would say. Well, even that is seems to be wrong, because anti doesn't mean against, but replacement, right? Not Dutch, just Google. All right, that's odd that you would get a Dutch link there. Anyway, that's the one. However, though the individuals in such a group would have little to fear from each other, they still would likely have to deal with acts of aggression from those outside of the group who still adhere to the belief in government. An individual whose mind has been freed, but who still lives in a society plagued by the delusion of authority, will be a constant risk of being the target of authoritarian aggression. Will be at risk. Being free in one's mind, understanding the concept of self-ownership, does not necessarily cause one to be physically free. However, it can make an enormous positive difference by opening up countless new means through which people can try to cope with, avoid, or even resist authoritarian attempts to control them. The individual who takes pride in being a law-abiding citizen has only one way to even attempt to achieve freedom, which is almost never effective, begging his masters to change their laws. On the other hand, one who understands that he owns himself owes no allegiance to any supposed master and needs no legislative permission to be free. And then it says has many more options, right? So one who understands that he owns himself has many more options. And the more people who have escaped the superstition, the easier avoidance or resistance becomes. For example, even a small number of self-owners can create channels of commerce which circumvent the usual controls and extortion schemes imposed by governments. Yes, we've actually had such a thing going on, and it's probably still going on, but I'm outside of that ring, I guess one would call it, outside of that circle. Here in Arnhem, in the Netherlands, there was a guy who... oh, my shoulder is killing me. There was a guy who... introduced silver coins, big silver coins, and he went to all the whatchamacall people that own stores and stuff, people in industry, and he said that they could buy these coins from him at, what was it, a little more than the value of silver at that point. And he told them that if they use these amongst each other, right, because, he'd sell them to a lot of people, to exchange goods, that they would avoid paying taxes. And that seems to work. And it's not even illegal, right? Ironically, this entire legitimate and moral form of voluntary interaction is often referred to as the black market, or doing business under the table, whereas the usual system of aggression, coercion and extortion is viewed as legitimate and righteous by the believers in government. In reality, the legitimacy of any trade, or any other human interaction, does not depend on whether some authority knows about it and controls it, as the concept of black market implies, but depends only upon whether what occurs is mutually consensual. Those who understand this can find many ways in which to circumvent or defeat attempts by government to coercively control and exploit them. Excuse me. Many acts of aggression done in the name of the law can be avoided or defeated fairly easily by a relatively small number of people, if they feel no automatic moral obligation to do as they are told. Of course, this is not always the case. If the gang called government does anything well, it is exerting brute force, whether in the form of military actions or domestic law enforcement. However, in almost all cases, most of the power wielded by those in government is the result not of guns and tanks and bombs, but of the perceptions of their victims. If 99% of a population obeys the ruling class out of a feeling of obligation or duty to do so, the remaining 1% can usually be controlled by brute force, with the approval of the other 99%. But if a more substantial percentage of the people feels no duty to obey, the amount of brute force needed to control them becomes enormous. To wit, many of the inhabitants of the United States now surrender about half of what they earn in taxes at various levels, and most feel obliged to do so. But if a foreign power somehow invaded and conquered the land, imposing a 50% tax would be utterly impossible because the people would feel no moral, legal or patriotic duty to comply. 200 million workers would find 200 million ways to use evasion, deception, secrecy or even outright violence to avoid or defeat such attempts by foreign thieves to enslave the people. Yeah, talking about thieves, right? This reminds me of this. I should probably play this for you guys. Let's see.
Let's not go off the record. You should be enraged with the Department of Justice because you just got rolled. Today it was announced that 5 major banks, Citigroup, JP Morgan, Chase, Barclays, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and UBS will plead guilty to felony charges for currency rigging. The banks will also pay fines totaling more than $5 billion. But guess what? Here's the rotten part. The Justice Department is charging only the banks. They are not indicting the people, the crooks who actually committed these crimes. DOJ is pulling a fast one on you. Why should the rich bank executives who actually committed the crimes get a complete pass? Justice wouldn't give you a pass. But it gets even worse. DOJ will now do some phony victory dance for getting billions of dollars in fines. But that's laughable because now one dime comes out of the pockets of the rich executives who committed the crimes. Who pays? The innocent shareholders of these banks. Shame on the Justice Department and shame on anybody else who's part of this. And that's my off-the-record comment tonight.
All right. That tells you who owns the DOG, right? Can you guys guess where I got this from? Can you guys guess what the source was? Today there is only one gang capable of oppressing the American people, and that is the American government. This is because it is the one gang imagined by most people to have the right to coerce and control and rob and extort the American people. A common concern among statists is that without a strong government to protect them, some foreign power would just come in and take over. But such fears completely overlook how large a role perception plays in the ability to oppress. An area, yes, Hans, you guys are well informed about mainstream media. You guessed, you got it right. Yes. Hans and Anon, they both got it. An area, a land the size of the United States, inhabited by 100 million gun owners in addition to 200 million other people, who would likely become gun owners if an invasion occurred, would be impossible to occupy and control by brute force alone. Yeah, I kind of tend to disagree with that. I'm sorry guys, but your guns are really obsolete. You know, that's so 1800s. And they have other ways to, besides mind control, to forcibly control people. They don't need guns, It's outdated. History gives many examples. Example given the Warsaw Ghetto, in World War II, the Vietnam War, and the aftermath of the war in Iraq, of how even an enormous technologically advanced standing army can be indefinitely frustrated by a relatively small number of armed insurgents. And the land inhabited by self-owners has another huge advantage, in that it is literally impossible for them to collectively surrender. Now, don't get me wrong, I think you should be armed, but that's just to protect you from the small criminal, right? You should be armed to be able to defend yourself against idiots that try to rob you, some criminal, what we would normally call a criminal, right? But it's useless against the government or even an army. You'll not get there. The technological state of Western military power is so immensely improved since World War II that your guns were obsolete. I know, for instance, that Russia, they're still a bit behind, and they are so far behind that 30 of their tanks would not last against one of the NATO tanks. And why is that? Because the NATO tanks are far more accurate and can hit the Russian tanks from further away accurately than any Russian tank could ever hit a NATO tank. Right? So one NATO tank can obliterate 30 Russian tanks easily. If there is no government pretending to represent the population and no one who claims to speak on behalf of the people as a whole, there is literally no way for them to give up without each and every individual surrendering. A good way to grasp the reality of the situation is to consider the matter from the perspective of the leader of the invaders. How would one even begin to try to invade and permanently occupy an area in which millions of inhabitants who could be hiding anywhere kill anything within at least 100 yards, as any decent hunter can do? An aspiring tyrant would have a far better chance of gaining power over the people by running for office, thereby obtaining the perceived right in the minds of his victims to rule and control them. Alright. Large-scale oppression especially since the advent of firearms depends a lot more on mind control than it does on body control. Those who crave dominion gain much more power by convincing their victims that it is wrong to disobey their commands than by convincing their victims that it is merely dangerous but moral to disobey. No matter how much the people complain and protest, as long as the people continue to obey the law, the commands of the politicians, the tyrants have little to fear. As long as their attempts to control and extort are seen as legal acts of authority, and as long as the people therefore feel an obligation to comply, unless and until the ruling class changes such laws, the people will remain enslaved in body, because they remain mentally enslaved. Ironically, many people still believe that a strong government is the only thing that can protect the people as a whole, when the belief in government is actually the only thing which can oppress the people as a whole. Brute force alone cannot do it on any large scale, as for any prolonged period of time. Even a gang with tanks, planes, bombs and other weapons has no power to control an armed populace for long unless it first dupes the people into believing that it has the right to control them. In other words, only a gang imagined to be authority can get away with long-term oppression and enslavement. As a result, government, or the belief in it, instead of being essential to the protection of individual rights, is essentially only for the prolonged and widespread violations of individual rights. Ironically, even most of those who recognize government as the biggest threat to liberty today still insist that government of some type is necessary for protection. The belief in authority is so strong that it can convince otherwise rational people that the very thing which routinely robs, coerces and assaults them is needed to protect them from robbery, coercion and assault. The fact that government has always been an aggressor and has never been purely a protector anywhere in the world at any time in history does not shake them off their cult-like belief in magical powers and virtues of the abstract, mythical entity called authority. What's up, JJ? This brings us to the next heading, the road to justice. That word comes from Emperor Justine, who was one of the most horrendous emperors around. Many large-scale injustices in history would have quickly collapsed or never would have started, if not for the authority condoning and enforcing such injustices. The evils of slavery, for example, are often blamed on racism and greed, but authority played a huge role in making slavery economically feasible. If there was not a huge, organized network of law enforcers to capture escaped slaves, and any who helped them escape, how long would slavery have continued? If freeing slaves was not illegal and thus immoral in the eyes of authoritarians, how much larger and more effective would the Underground Railroad have been? It probably would not have been known as an underground anything if it was not illegal. The abolitionists movement consisted of people who thought slavery was immoral and who wanted the laws changed to officially declare slavery to be immoral and illegal. If instead of petitioning for a change in laws, the abolitionists were actually freeing slaves, the slave trade most likely would have collapsed decades earlier, if it ever happened at all. If it ever happened at all? What's he talking about? Shipping slaves halfway around the world would be a very risky business indeed if, the moment you land, your cargo might be forcibly liberated. The problem is that most people believe that even immoral, unjust laws should be obeyed until the laws changed. Clearly, this means that such people's loyalty to the myth of authority is stronger than their loyalty to morality, and doing what the master tells them is more important to them than doing what they know is right. And mankind has suffered greatly because of it. The authority of people to resist tyranny depends largely upon whether they accept the myth of authority or not. Those who can see the injustice committed by government but who continue to believe that they must follow the law and work within the system will never achieve justice. On the other hand, those who do not view the political megalomaniacs as rightful rulers, those who do not feel an obligation to obey an immoral law, those who do not feel the need to treat what is actually a parasite class, a gang of political thieves and thugs, as untouchable, respectable and honorable, have a far better chance of defeating legal tyranny. And most tyranny and oppression which has occurred throughout history was done legally. There are many methods available to those willing to illegally resist injustice and tyranny, including everything from passive resistance to non-violent sabotage to things such as assassination and other forcible resistance. Depending on the severity of oppression and the individual's own values, conscience, and beliefs about when, if ever, the use of violence is appropriate, one may choose any number of ways to defeat tyranny. Some will simply try to stay under the radar, living in such a way as to avoid the attention of authorities' enforcers. Some may choose open civil disobedience, such as hundreds of individuals openly smoking marijuana in front of a police station. Some may choose a more active but non-violent method, such as slashing the tires of police GUS? I don't know what that is. Or destroying other property used to commit acts of authoritarian aggression. Others may choose the method of openly violent resistance, such as occurred in the American Revolution. By analogy, the intended victim of a robbery, the non-governmental kind, may try to evade the thief or outsmart him or even kill him if it comes down to that, whatever it takes to avoid being victimized. Likewise, those who recognize that legal evil is still evil and resisting it is still justified would not waste time on elections and lobbying politicians for a change in legislation. They would simply do whatever they could to protect themselves and possibly others from being victimized by such legal aggression. Beyond a certain point, the more people who resist, the less violence is necessary to do so. If a local police force has a dozen narcotics officers, people whose main job is to commit acts of aggression against others who have committed neither force nor fraud, and several hundred civilians, let it be known that they believe that they have the right to use whatever it takes, including deadly force, to stop any attempted kidnappings, home invasions, or similar acts of aggression committed by narcotics officers. The aggressors, the police, if they did not have any bigger authoritarian gang to appeal to for help, would simply give up to avoid being exterminated. The deterrent effect that works against private criminals can work just as well as against government criminals. In India, Mahatma Gandhi and his followers used widespread passive disobedience to undermine British control of that country. Alcohol prohibition in the United States is another example of an immoral law that was basically disobeyed out of existence. The high levels of disobedience, along with the refusal of most jurors to give their blessings to the legal aggression, along with some acts of violent resistance, made the immoral law unenforceable. The legislatures eventually repealed it in an attempt to save face, because having an unenforceable law on the books goes a long way towards destroying the ruling class legitimacy in the eyes of its victims. Anywhere the people feel no moral obligation to comply with authoritarian demands, any legal acts of aggression can be ignored out of existence. When the number of self-owners is smaller, however, sometimes violence is necessary to defeat legal acts of aggression. If only a few people recognize the illegitimacy of legal oppression, forcible resistance often backfires. Where there is oppression, there is always violence. It is usually one-sided, with the agents of authority committing most of or all of the violence. The man who passively cooperates while claiming to be against violence is in fact rewarding the violence of the state. When an act of aggression is committed, whether by authority or anyone else, non-violence by definition ceases to be an option. The only question is whether the aggressive violence will go unchallenged, or whether defensive force will be used to counter it. Either way, violence will occur. Of course, the thieves, thugs and murderers who declare their crimes to be legal, which every tyrant in history has done, will always brand anyone who resists them as criminals and terrorists. Only those who feel no shame at being labeled criminals because they have shed the myth of authority and recognize that the term law is often used to try to characterize something evil as something good, have any chance at all of achieving freedom. Again, somewhat ironically, the more people there are who understand self-ownership and the mythical nature of authority, and who are willing to fight for what is right, a fight against what is legal but wrong, the less violent the road to true civilization will be. Which brings us to the next heading, side effects of the myth. Looking back in history, there is no shortage of examples of man's inhumanity to man, examples of oppression and suffering, violence and hatred, and situations and events which do not reflect well on the human race in general. And though many of the most blatant injustices in history were the obvious product of the belief in government, such as wars and overt oppressions, many other injustices, which are not usually attributed to government action, would also have been impossible without the involvement of authority. In addition to the example of whether slavery could have existed had it not been legally enforced, as mentioned above, similar questions could be asked about the treatment of the American Indians. If not for the authoritarian government edicts and the state mercenaries to enforce them, would there have been such a large-scale, concerted effort to exterminate or forcibly evict the natives from the lands they had inhabited for generations? No doubt there would still have been smaller conflicts due to the clash of cultures and demands for farming and hunting lands, but would it have been in anyone's personal interest to engage in large-scale violent combat? Alright, I'm gonna... because this comes to my mind, maybe it will take too long, but I'm gonna try to find a bookmark that I made. Let's see if I can get this. Is it this one? No. If it takes too long, I will just go back to reading, but just a couple of secs here. See if we can find this. Blah, blah, blah. Choop, choop, choop. Lysander Spooners, interesting, but not what I was looking for. Finnegan's Wake, yeah, that's just insane English. Blah blah. Office of Population Affairs, right? Such a thing exists, right? It's a government website. Office of Population Affairs. What do you think that is about? Ah, here, I think this is the one. Come on, open it up. Alright. Now I need to find what I was going to read to you, and then I'll put the link back in the chat room. Let's see. Where does it say what I was looking for? Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Choop, choop, choop. Where is it? Huh. Blah blah, where is it? I can't find it. This is where it was, right? Somewhere at the bottom. I can't find it. Supreme Judge, doing the name, authority to good people, United States, right all to be free, absolved from allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections ought to be totally dissolved, free independent states, establish commerce. No, it's not at the bottom. We have warned them from time to time, attempts from legislation to extend unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations. Nope, this is not what I was looking for either. Oh my god. This is not so nice that I now can't find it. I think this is one. This is it. This is it. I think. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely parallel in the most barbarous ages, and toward unworthy head and totally unworthy head of a civilized nation. No, it's not it. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages. Right, so this is indeed what I was looking for. Right. Let me just copy this. Copy that. Put that in the chat room, and after that I'll give you the link to where I got it from. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Right? Indian savages. Now where do you think this is from, right? Go look it up. It's right there in your archives.gov. Right? It's almost at the bottom. Not really, but almost. Right? So if you look at them as merciless Indian savages, that's what you get. Right? Alright. Picking this up. After open slavery, did we do this or? After open slavery was ended in the United States at about the same time that legal slavery, the income tax, first came into being, racial tensions and violent conflicts continued. Many believed that government then came along and saved the day. In reality, violent conflicts between the races was encouraged by authority. For many years, racial segregation was forcibly imposed via laws. Ironically, racial tensions were later exacerbated further by government-mandated integration, which sought to coerce people of different races and cultures to mix, whether they wanted to or not. Again, the result was violence. During the entire fiasco, some businesses and schools, if left in freedom, would have chosen segregation and some would have chosen integration. If not for government trying to forcibly impose one official policy on everyone, parents could simply have chosen which school to send their children to, segregated or not. And shoppers could simply have chosen which businesses to patronize, segregated or not. Not only was much of the violence committed against blacks done directly by government enforcers, but even much of the privately committed violence was the result of anger over people being forced by government to deal with people of another race and culture. It is silly to think that forcing people apart or forcing people together will make people happier, nicer, or more open-minded and tolerant. In neither case was the peace or security of either race served by authoritarian intervention. While it is impossible to say exactly how widespread or prolonged segregation and racism would have been without government involvement, it is common sense that if people of all races and religions are allowed the freedom to choose who to associate with, it at least makes it possible for very different cultures to peacefully coexist. But when government gets involved, and the debate is between forcing races to remain separate or forcing races to mingle, obviously some people will be angered either way, and rightly so. This is not to say that every point of view is equally valid. The point is that people of vastly different worldviews, however wise or stupid, open-minded or bigoted, informed or ignorant their views may be, can actually coexist peacefully, even in close proximity, unless government gets involved. Different people may not like each other, may not approve of each other's beliefs and lifestyles, and in fact, many harshly criticize or condemn other cultures. Yeah, you're right. That happens. Even I do that, you know. But that does not mean they cannot peacefully coexist. with both sides refraining from violent aggression. But whenever government gets involved, the coercion inherent in all law makes certain that people will not just get along. And we're talking the last sentence. The whole world, the whole word, not world, culture is mentioned, right? Now, what's his name? Not Rupert Sheldrake, but he had trilogues with this other guy and this other guy. What's his name? Let's see. I'm sorry about all this. Terence McKenna, alright? Google Terence McKenna and culture is not your friend. He makes some valid points there. But seriously, you know, culture is a lot to do with mind control. That's why government has a department of culture. Yeah. A culture can impose, quote unquote, impose certain ways of behavior for people. Right? I don't think it should be like that. If it's a Western culture or an Eastern culture or a religious culture, I don't care. It shouldn't be in any case. You should for yourself decide how you should act, what your behavior should be like. Not let it be decided by the culture that you grow up in. The most unfortunate thing about that is, like Alan Watt points out, if you grow up in a culture and your parents act as if everything is normal, then you automatically, you don't ask questions about the culture that you grow up in, because your parents seem to think it was okay, and you have a natural tendency, I guess the word is, to trust your parents. Why wouldn't you, right? Especially as a child. So when you grow up thinking that this is normal, it's much harder to get out of it. It's much harder to start questioning your own culture. Right? But I think it should be destroyed. Yeah. In your mind, that is. Make your own decisions. Don't let it be pushed in a certain direction by the culture that you grow up in. I don't care what kind of culture. Alright, but that does not mean they cannot peacefully coexist, with both sides refraining from violent aggression. Well, that depends. If your culture says that you should use violence, right? Then the cultures will clash, right? But whenever government gets involved, the coercion inherent in all law makes certain people will not just get along. Another example of the indirect deleterious, I don't know that word, effects of government action is the fact that the violence associated with the drug trade, the production and distribution of illegal substances, exists only because of narcotic laws. By outlawing a substance or a behavior, even when all of the participants are willing adults, The politicians create a black market, which not only has a huge profit potential due to limiting the supply, but creates a situation which specifically deprives customers and suppliers of any legal protection. For example, if a drug dealer is robbed or assaulted by the police or by anyone else, he is unlikely to call law enforcers to help him. Outlawing something consensual, whether it be prostitution, gambling or drug use, almost guarantees that the market will be controlled by whichever gang is the most violent or has paid off the most cops. Alright, I need to reload this because apparently something went wrong with the connection. Da-da-da. Is it loading? Nope. Damn it. Let's see if I can find the other one. Hold on guys, this might interfere with the sound for a bit. My internet is still up, right? Yep, my internet is still up. There we go. And then this one, I need to again click pause really fast. Yay! There the chat is. The other one? Ah, the other one is back also. Okay. That's where we are. Anon says, I started this live with a bunch of ideas about American culture. You know what we say here in Europe? You guys don't have a culture. You're much too young to have a culture. You know? I was taught that the American idea of jurisprudence was that it is better that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent person go to jail. Okay. Yeah. Alright, I got the chat back. Let's see where we were. Outlawing something consensual, somewhere around here we were, whether it be prostitution, gambling or drug use, almost guarantees that the market will be controlled by whichever gang is the most violent or has paid off the most cops and other officials. Again, a perfect before and after example of this was alcohol prohibition in the United States. When alcohol became illegal, it was immediately taken over by organized crime, which was renowned not only for its violence but also for its ability to bribe government agents and officials. When alcohol became legal again, all of the related violence stopped instantly. Alright? Okay. Let's see. There. Let's see what we can find here. It's Ron Paul. No, I don't want Ron Paul. Freedom Rock Band. Yeah, this looks old. Let's see what this is. Bleep bleep. Blah blah blah. It's almost top of the hour, so let's see what we can do for a pause. A little break. This should be Poker Face. Here you go, guys.
For my country, for the pain that it's been through. She's been made to suffer for the profit of a few. Some plans are unfolding. The winds of change have touched our shores. I hear the pipers are crying. as the dreams being crucified. America, and my love for you and all that I do. America, show my love for you and all that I do. All that I do. I pray for my country and for friends and family, mourning in their ignorance, while staying safe within a dream. And I will fight for freedoms and our ways of liberties. I die for my country, and it's been God and America. Show my love for you and all that I do. America, show my love for you and all that I cry for my people in the time of tragedy. I'm reminded, and the truth set us free. And the truth set us free. I say hallelujah.
Yep, that was Pokerface. Check them out, pokerface.com. Alright. Picking this up. Despite that crystal clear example of the horrible results of enacting laws to prohibit vices, most people still support laws against behaviors and habits they find distasteful. As a result, the related violence continues. Instead of being recognized as a problem which existed because of government and its laws, it is still imagined to be a problem which government must fight against. The same could be said of the infamous violence of loan sharks who deal with illegal gambling, and the violence of pimps in places where prostitution is illegal. In such cases, even better than a before and after comparison is a side-by-side comparison. Does gambling lead to more violence in Atlanta City where it is legal, or in places where it is illegal? Does prostitution pose a bigger threat to all involved in Amsterdam, where it is legal, or in all of the places where it is illegal? Is it legal in Amsterdam? Is that so? You know, as far as I know, I could be wrong, right? But as far as I know, it's like with marijuana pre-1994. Because they outlawed it in 1994. It wasn't legal. You weren't allowed to have marijuana or grow it, but they wouldn't, if the police found you, even the special police, you know, the secret ones, a personal experience with that. They would let you go. You know, they caught me once with a couple of plants, and they just wanted to see what I had on me, and they said, "Well, take good care of them," you know. So they wouldn't bother with you, even though it was not legal, right? And I think the same went for prostitution. You know, the fact that they did not the government did not violently oppress these trades made it so that it became open, and that gave them the ability to observe and see what's going on. Right? If a hooker would get problems, she wouldn't go to the police. You know, she would send her pimp to solve the problem, right? So, you know, I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's legal. That might have changed, but I don't know. The thing I do know about it is that they want to give all of the hookers in Amsterdam a pass. You know, like we don't have enough passes already. I don't know how it is with you guys in the United States, but if I open my wallet, pull out my passes. I got one here. I can't even remove my garbage if I don't have this freaking pass. I must have it. Otherwise you won't get rid of your garbage. Then there is my vet pass, my insurance pass for getting sick. Then there's a pass you get from the grocery store. Then there's my ANWB pass, which ensures that when I get in trouble with a car, I can call them. Then there's my company pass. Then there's my identification pass. Then there's my registration from the car pass. And the pass that allows me to drive in the first place, a car, right? And I try to keep them to a minimum. Right? I can't imagine what kind of passes other people must have. It's ridiculous. Oh, you can't even carry your wallet almost. That many passes they shove down your throat. So they want to give these hookers a pass. Why? Because the government wants to know if you're 21. And if you're not allowed to be a hooker. Right, so this is not to say that prostitution, gambling or drugs, including alcohol, are good things, but that, good or bad, introducing the coercion of government into the situation does not do away with such vices, but only makes them more dangerous for everyone involved, and often people who are not involved. What's that? There's only two things I hate in the world. People who are intolerant of other people's cultures and the Dutch. Yeah, I mentioned something about that last week, didn't I? Dutch people are way too tolerant. And, well, that looks like a Dutch girl. Yes, it does. Yeah. Most Dutch girls look nice. Yeah. Lest anyone still imagine that such vice laws are the result of good intention, the politicians are well aware that gambling, prostitution and illegal drug use still occur in government prisons. The politicians know full well that even if constant Captivity, surveillance, random searches, and harsh punishment cannot prevent such behaviors in people who are kept in closely monitored cages. Laws obviously cannot eradicate such behaviors from an entire country. But they can, and do, supply tyrants with a ready excuse for ever-expanding power, and that is exactly why government enacts vice laws to begin with, to create crime where there was none, in an attempt to justify the existence of authoritarian power and control. In a world without the myth of authority, many people, including this author, would still strongly disapprove of drug use, prostitution, and other vices. Really. But they would be unlikely to support efforts to have such behaviors violently suppressed. Alright. I can't even disapprove with drug use or prostitution, you know. If you say self-ownership, that means you can do with your body what you want, right? If you want to prostitute yourself, that's your choice. How can you be against that if you are so for self-ownership? That's a contradiction, right? Not only would they usually feel unjustified in advocating violence if they did not have the excuse of authority to hide behind, but they would be unlikely to want to provide the billions of dollars necessary to wage a large-scale, violent campaign against such widespread activities. Even the most judgmental person would have both economic and moral incentives to leave others in peace, as well as the fear of retaliation from any he chose to commit acts of aggression against. Of course, open criticism of lifestyle and behaviors and attempts to persuade people to change their ways are a perfectly acceptable part of human society. In fact, if people had to try to use reason and verbal persuasion to win people over, instead of using the brute force of government, perhaps the targets would be more open to listening. At the very least, people who no longer turn an issue of bad habits into an issue of bloodshed and brutality, as happens now with all attempts to legislate morality. The flip side to the notion that if it's illegal it must be bad is, if it's legal it must be okay. Perhaps the biggest example of this is the fact that in 1913 the United States government not only legalized slavery via the income tax, directly and forcibly confiscating the fruits of people's labors, but also by way of the Federal Reserve Act, legalized a level of counterfeiting and bank fraud which boggles the mind. In short, the politician gave bankers legal permission to make up money out of thin air, and to loan such fake fabricated money out, at interest, to others, including governments. Though most people are unaware of the specifics of how such huge frauds and robberies occur via fiat currencies and fractional reserve banking, many people now have a gut instinct that the banks are doing something deceptive and corrupt. What they fail to realize is the government which gave the banks permission to defraud and swindle the public out of literally trillions of dollars. Well, they weren't allowed to do that, right? Doesn't it say something like only Congress has the right to mint a coin in the Constitution? So it's unconstitutional, right? Another particularly controversial example of how a debate of legality can trump a debate about facts and morality is the issue of abortion. One side lobbies for authority to make or keep abortion legal and then defends the practice based upon its legality. The other side pushes for abortion to be outlawed, in the hopes of having the violence of authority used to prevent the practice. In logical terms, the only relevant question, which is a religious, biological, philosophical question, not a legal question, is, at what point does a fetus count as a person? The answer to that question dictates whether abortion amounts to murder or it is the equivalent of having a kidney removed. However, instead of addressing the only question that actually matters, as complex and controversial as it may be, both sides usually focus instead on trying to get the violence of authority on their side. As another example of legalized injustice, almost everyone is aware of how outrageous and irrational lawsuits have become. But they still fail to realize that it is the degrees of government-appointed judges which allow it to happen at all. In addition to government being able to legally steal from another person to give to someone else, government creates via the current system of litigation a mechanism whereby one person can directly and legally rob another. Laws in the name of environmentalism are also used for immoral power grabs in both directions. With enough money, a company which is actually polluting and thus infringing on the property rights of others can trade campaign contributions for legal permission to pollute. At the same time, they can use environmental laws to crush competition by creating and enforcing a maze of environmental regulations, many of them unnecessary or counterproductive, sometimes idiotic, to keep smaller companies out of the market. Additionally, politicians can use vague threats of environmental dangers as excuses to gain control of private industries, to control behavior of millions, or to extort more money for their own purposes. In many industries, success now depends less upon providing a valuable service at a reasonable price than it does upon obtaining special favors and preferential treatment from government. This can be in the form of direct handouts, political trading, licensing schemes, tariffs on international trade, regulatory control and favoritism, and many other means. The result of all of these higher prices, inferior products and services, fewer choices, and so on, is often assumed to be the result of the shortcomings of private industry, instead of being recognized for what it is: the adverse consequences of authoritarian control over human interaction. Major economic crashes are always the result of government tampering with commerce. Well, that's not what I learned. Major economic crashes are also the result of banks not lending money. Short of total physical destruction, the only way to destroy an entire economy is to meddle with the medium of exchange, the money, through legalized counterfeiting, via the issuance of fabricated credit and the issuance of fiat currency. Most people, being ignorant of even basic economics, view inflation and other economic problems as natural, unfortunate, but unavoidable occurrences. In truth, they are symptoms of a large-scale legalized fraud and theft. Immigration laws give another example of indirect damage and secondary problems caused by government. Aside from the obvious direct coercion involved, such laws cause other problems that would not exist otherwise, including the lucrative, often vicious racket of smuggling illegals into the country, illegals being easy target for human trafficking and other forms of exploitation because they do not dare speak out or seek help, and people being forced to live under tyrannical regimes because they cannot physically escape. And because illegals are already classified as criminals and often viewed as undesirables simply for being in the country, and receive neither respect nor protection from much of the citizenry, there is less of an incentive for them to otherwise behave in a law-abiding manner. Even many problems that seem to be non-governmental in nature exist because of some law. Of course there are, and there will always be, instances of fraud and theft committed by unscrupulous individuals acting on their own. But most people are completely unaware of how many seemingly private swindles, schemes and rackets are not only allowed by authority, but encouraged and rewarded by the laws of government, whether intentionally or accidentally. Having no truly free market to compare it to, many continue to assume that state coercion is necessary, when all it actually does is hinder and interfere with human productivity and progress. Brings us to the next heading, what might have been. It is impossible to even begin to imagine in how many ways history would have been different if the superstition of authority had collapsed long ago. Obviously, the atrocities of Nazi Germany, Stalin's Russia, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, and many more would never have happened. Furthermore, while there could still be violent regional, cultural or religious clashes, large-scale wars simply could not and would not happen without soldiers blindly obeying a perceived authority. If the enormous amount of resources, effort and ingenuity that have been poured into the mass destruction had been put into something productive, where would we be today? If instead of spending such a huge amount of time and effort struggling over who should have the reins of power and what that power should be used for, people had spent all those years being inventive and productive, what might the world look like now? What if every person had been allowed to support what he wanted, instead of having government robbing everyone and then having a never-ending argument over how these public funds should be spent? What if, instead of arguing over which centralized authoritarian plan should be forcibly imposed on everyone, people lived their own lives and pursued their own dreams? Who can even imagine how far humanity as a whole would have progressed by now? This is not to say that without the belief in authority, personal conflicts would never arise. They would, and they would sometimes end in violence. The difference is that with the belief in government, they always end in violence, because coercion is all that government ever does. Whereas people, even people of very different viewpoints and backgrounds, can usually find ways to peacefully coexist in any situation which authority becomes involved in, is automatically solved by force. With the issue of same-sex marriage, what if, instead of an ongoing argument over what views and choices should be forced upon everyone, every church minister, every employer and every other individual could decide for himself how to live, what he wants to call marriage, and so on? With the issue of prayer in school, what if, instead of government creating a hostile conflict by forcibly confiscating money from all property owners to fund one big, homogeneous public school system, each person was allowed to choose which schools, if any, he wanted to support? This does not mean that people different views would like each other, this sentence is not typed right, or end up believing the same thing. It does mean that without believing the same things, they could still peacefully coexist, a situation which government does not allow. What if, instead of government agencies deciding what drugs and medical treatments it would legally allow people to try, and which practitioners would be licensed to practice, people could make their own choices? In such a scenario, the business of providing customs with unbiased information about various products and services would flourish. Government solutions are always about politicians deciding how to deal with different situations, and then forcibly imposing their ideas on everyone else. But it is neither morally legitimate nor effective on a practical basis to have politicians making everyone else's choices for them. And that is true of all sorts of aspects of human society. What would the world look like if, for the past 100 years, instead of arguing over how to forcibly limit people's options, which is what every law does, people had spent time and effort trying new ideas and coming up with new approaches to problems, each person having been allowed to devote his own time, effort and money to whatever he personally chose to support. Excuse me. And what if, instead of a centralized system of forced wealth redistribution, people had been left in freedom to decide for themselves the best, most compassionate ways to help the needy? Instead of a system that rewards laziness and dishonesty and breeds dependency, we might have a system that actually helps people. What if, instead of government forcing businesses to do whatever the politicians and bureaucrats declare to be safe, people could come up with new ideas and inventions, set their own priorities and make their own decisions about how to best protect themselves? What if, instead of having a centralized control machine trying to force people to be fair, people could choose for themselves who to associate with, what deals to make, and so on? Everything government pays for creates a conflict. Every public project, from grants given out by National Endowment for the Arts, to grants for certain studies or businesses, to schools, to parks, to everything else, public amounts to robbing thousands of millions of people in order to give the money to a few people. Why would anyone expect everyone in an entire country, or even 100 people, to all exactly agree on how their money should be spent? What if, instead of many trillions of dollars in spending power being diverted and hijacked every year to fund the agendas of politicians and their bureaucrats, that wealth had gone into whatever things the people who earned the money actually cared about and wanted to support? What if, for the last several thousand years, each person had minded his own business and not tried to use government to force his ideas and priorities on everyone else? What if, instead of a giant centralized monster violently limiting everyone's choices, everyone's options, everyone's creativity and ingenuity, trying to force conformity and sameness while draining the producers of their ideas and their wealth, different people and different groups have been trying new ideas and figuring out the best way to solve problems and create a better world, guided by their own beliefs and values. Sadly, the idea still terrifies a lot of people, who still imagine that a world forcibly controlled by politicians would be more safe and civilized than a world inhabited by free human beings exercising free will and individual judgment. The fact is that those people who put their faith in government to make things work, though they are by far the majority and though they may mean well, are the problem. As a result of their indoctrination into the cult of authority, you might call this culture as well, by the way, they continue to believe and push the profoundly insane idea that the only road to peace, justice and harmonious civilization comes from constant, widespread coercion and forcible government controls, perpetual oppression and enslavement done in the name of law, and the sacrificing of free will and morality at the altar of domination and blind obedience. As harsh as that may sound, that is the basis of all belief in government. Next heading is accepting reality. Statists often say, show me an example of where a society without government has worked. Of course, since they are speaking of societies consisting almost entirely of thoroughly indoctrinated authoritarians, human society without a ruling class is rarely ever contemplated, much less attempted. Yet the statists use the fact that they have never tried true freedom because the concept is completely foreign to their way of thinking as proof that a stateless society wouldn't work. Take a look at the Hittites. That's a society, as far as I know, that didn't have authoritarian government. This would be akin to a group of medieval doctors who all use leeches for every ailment, arguing, show me one case where a doctor has cured a headache without the use of leeches. Of course, if none of them had ever considered any treatment other than leeches, there would be not an example of alternative methods working. But this would be a testament to the ignorance of the doctors, not the ineffectiveness of treatments which has never been tried. But the more important point is that anarchy is what is. To say that society cannot exist without government is exactly as reasonable as saying that Christmas cannot occur without Santa Claus. Society already exists without government, and has from the beginning. It has been people imagining an entity with the right to rule, hallucinating a thing called authority, which has made the story of mankind consist largely of oppression, violence, suffering, murdering, mayhem. Ironically, statists often point to the death and suffering which occurs when two or more groups are fighting over who should be in charge, label that as anarchy, and cite it as evidence that without government there would be chaos and death, right? That's contradictory, right? But such bloodshed and oppression is the direct, obvious result of the belief in authority, not the result of a lack of government. It is true that, compared to life under a stable, entrenched authoritarian regime, life in a country where the people are fighting over who the new authority should be, can be a lot more dangerous and unpredictable. As a result, people living in war-torn areas often wish only for there to be an end to the conflict, for one side to win and become the new government. To such people, a stable government may represent relative peace and security, but the underlying cause of the oppression committed by stable regimes and the bloodshed which occurs during struggles for power is the belief in authority. If no one believed in a legitimate ruling class, no one would fight over who should rule. If there was no throne, no one would fight over it. All civil wars and nearly all revolutions rest on the assumption that someone should be in charge. Without the superstition of authority, there would be no reason for such things to happen at all. By its very nature, government adds nothing positive to society. It creates no wealth and generates no virtue. It adds only immoral violence and the illusion that such violence is legitimate. Allowing some people to forcibly dominate all others, which is all that government ever does not contribute to society one speck of talent or ability or productivity or resourcefulness or ingenuity or creativity, knowledge, compassion, or any other positive quality possessed by human beings. Instead, it constantly stifles and limits all of those things through its coercive laws. It is destructive and insane to accept the notion that civilization requires the forcible limiting of possibilities. Yeah. And the violent restraint of the human mind and spirit, that civil society can exist only if the power and virtue of every individual is forcibly overcome and suppressed by a gang of masters and exploiters, that the average man cannot be trusted to govern himself, but that the politicians can be trusted to govern everyone else, that the only way for morality and virtue of mankind to shine through is to crush the free will and self-determination of billions of human beings, and to convert them all into unthinking, obedient puppets of a ruling class, and a source of power for tyrants and megalomaniacs, that the path to civilization is the destruction of individual free will, judgment and self-determination. That is the foundation, the heart and soul of the superstition called authority. When people are ready to recognize that heinous lie for what it is, and begin to accept personal responsibility for their own actions and for the state of society, and not one moment before, then true humanity can begin. People can desperately wish for peace on earth until they are blue in the face, but they will never see it unless and until they are willing to pay the price by giving up one tired old superstition. The solution to most of society's ills is for you, dear reader, to recognize the myth of authority for what it is. Give it up yourself, and then begin efforts to deprogram and wake up all of the people you know who, as a result of their indoctrination into the cult of authority worship, and in spite of their virtues and noble intentions, continue to support and participate in the violent, anti-human, destructive, and evil oppression and aggression machine known as government. Next heading, the punchline, revisited. Contrary to what nearly everyone has been taught to believe, government is not necessary for civilization. It is not conducive to civilization. It is, in fact, the antithesis of civilization. It is not cooperation or working together or voluntary interaction. It is not peaceful coexistence. It is coercion, force, violence. It is animalistic aggression, cloaked by pseudo-religious cult-like rituals which are designed to make it appear legitimate and righteous. It is brute thuggery disguised as consent and organization. It is the enslavement of mankind, the subjugation of free will, and the destruction of morality, masquerading as civilization and society. The problem is not just authority can be used for evil, the problem is that, at its most basic essence, it is evil. In everything it does, it defeats the free will of human being controlled. Let's try this again. It defeats the free will of human being controlling them through coercion and fear. Alright, I don't get this sentence. It supersedes and destroys moral consciences, replacing them with unthinking blind obedience. It cannot be used for good, and any more than a bomb can be used to heal a body. It is always aggression, always the enemy of peace, always the enemy of justice. The moment it ceases to be an attacker, it ceases to fit the definition of government. It is, by its very nation, a murderer and a thief, the enemy of mankind, a poison to humanity, a dominator and a controller, ruler and oppressor. It can be nothing else. The alleged right to rule in any degree in any form is the opposite of humanity. The initiation of violence is the opposite of harmonious coexistence. The desire for dominion is the opposite of love for mankind. Hiding the violence under layers of complex rituals and self-contradictory rationalizations, and labeling brute thuggery as virtue and compassion does not change that fact. Claiming noble goals, saying that the violence is the will of the people, or that it is being committed for the common good, or for the children, cannot change evil into good. Legalizing wrong does not make it right. One man forcibly subjugating another, no matter how it is described or how it is carried out, is uncivilized and immoral. The destruction it causes, the injustice it creates, the damage it does to every soul that it touches, perpetrators, victims, and spectators alike, cannot be undone by calling it law or by claiming that it was necessary. Evil, by any name, is still evil. The ultimate message here is very simple. All of recorded history screams it, yet few have until now allowed themselves to hear it. The message is, if you love death and destruction, oppression and suffering, injustice and violence, repression and torture, helplessness, despair, perpetual conflict, bloodshed, then teach your children to respect authority and teach them that obedience is a virtue. If, on the other hand, you value peaceful coexistence, compassion and cooperation, freedom and justice, then teach your children the principles of self-ownership. Teach them the respect to rights of every human being and teach them to recognize and reject the belief in authority for what it is. The most irrational, self-contradictory, anti-human, evil, destructive and dangerous superstition the world has ever known. Alright, we're at the end of it. Dedication. This book is dedicated to two people. The first person who, because of reading this book, disobeys an order to harm someone else, and the person who, as a result, is not harmed. About the author. Larkin Rose, the self-described enemy of the state, lives with his wife and daughter in eastern Pennsylvania. The author of several books, including The Iron Web and How to Be a Successful Tyrant, the Megalomaniac Manifesto, Mr. Rose is an outspoken, nationally known proponent of individual liberty, self-ownership and voluntary society. Alright, for more visit, and then the link is missing, larkinrose.com, I think it is. I need to check that. I think it's larkinrose.com. Larkinrose. Yes, larkinrose.com. Alright. That's already, I already read that. About the copyright. The beginning of this season. This is probably at the back of the book. Most people, looking at our troubled world with its long history of injustice and human suffering, will attribute social evils to the greed, ignorance, hatred, or lack of compassion of others. Rarely does anyone consider the possibility that his own attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs may be the root cause of the most of the world's suffering. But in almost every case they are. The vast majority of theft, extortion, intimidation, harassment, assault, and even murder, the vast majority of man's inhumanity to man, comes not from the greed, hatred, and intolerance that lurks in our hearts, but from one pernicious and almost universal assumption, one unquestioned belief, one irrational, self-contradicting superstition that infects all races, all religions, all nationalities, ages, and income levels. If humankind could give up this one false idea, even without otherwise acquiring another scrap of wisdom or compassion, the vast majority of injustice and oppression would instantly cease. But this cannot happen until people are ready and willing to turn their judgmental eyes upon themselves, to objectively examine their own belief system, to recognize and understand, and finally to abandon the most dangerous superstition, right? Which is the belief in authority. That was it, guys. That was the most dangerous superstition by Larkin Rose. And thanks, Larkin, for letting me read this. And so there's about 15 minutes left. So what you can do is contact me at Skype and fill up these last minutes with me. Yeah. It's Solvinur, Solvinur. Just send me a text and I'll drag you in. And you can tell the rest of the listeners what you thought of all of these last Solvinur events that we had about Larkin Rose's The Most Dangerous Superstition. Right? I got some other PDFs open, like Jacques Ellul, Propaganda, and the Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski. You know, those are interesting reads as well. But especially Jacques Ellul, it's a nice book. which, as far as I know, it's about mind control. Right? It says, right, propaganda, right, that's the name. The formation of man's attitudes, well, that's mind control. So, that would be a good read. Alright. I'm not gonna do that though. I'm gonna get rid of that. There we go. So, what did you guys think of all of this, guys? Yeah. People in the chat. Anon 37, Del, Hecty, hey, Hecty. Joe, Friday, Jules, Dog, Vincent, Listener, Gringo, and 2 Anons. You wanna come on air and tell me what you thought about all of this? Just contact me, Solvinur, Skype, and I'll drag you in. Alright, that one can go away. Alright. We're good. Let's see. Yeah. Chirp. Blah blah. Thanks, says Anon, for tuning us on to Larkin Rose. Yeah, he's good. You can find things about him on YouTube as well. I agree with almost everything that Larkin put forth in this PDF. So, well, what is it, Mr. Vunch? Yes, okay. Well, yeah, it took a long time to write that. Yeah. Here. No, come on. Yes, here it is. Right click. And there we go. Yeah, this is how Skype works. Really simple, right?
Good morning, Walter.
Vince, how you doing, buddy?
All right, how are you doing? Oops, okay, I didn't have my mic plugged in all the way. Now I'm not hearing me echo. Good morning, Walter.
Good morning. Yeah, it's almost evening here, but yeah. It's still morning. Where are you anyways?
I'm in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas.
Yeah, which is that east or west?
It's if you could take an X right across America, you'd about hit Arkansas right there, and if you X'd in crossed Arkansas, it'd be in the top half up there, right in the middle.
Okay, yeah. So no.
It's pretty out here. We've been having a lot of rain, not as much as down there in South Texas, I guess, but it's really pretty here. All the flowers are bloomed out, all the wildflowers, and the honeysuckle and the privet. It just smells wonderful here.
Huh. Yeah, I had the apple tree bloom, not the pear though. So I wonder when that one's coming, but. And the strawberries are coming soon.
Nice.
They've already bloomed. Yeah.
Well, good morning to everybody in chat. Lively Saturday here.
You still make radio, buddy?
No, I'm just kind of working behind the scenes over here at UCY and adding in where I can.
Oh, that's too bad. I thought you made nice radio.
Well, thanks. It got to a point where I felt like I had said everything, and now I need to go back and look at everything I said, and continue that self-examination. And I'd like to come back at some point and represent everything that I've done presented.
Uh-huh.
You bet. So yeah, I like to kind of work as a promoter and add on for some of the other hosts here, and sharing the information that we have here at UCY through World Truth, and of course they're over with Real Liberty Media, where Hal broadcasts here every Sunday. I love Hal. I know you do too.
Hell,
He's a great, yes, behind the woodshed, a great professor.
Yeah. Last thing I remember from him commenting on what people wrote to him was that he said that he got a letter from somebody that said that he shouldn't be annoyed by the fact that he has to keep repeating himself. And I'm like, no, please don't be annoyed, because, I have a hard time following him sometimes, and I'm like, whoa, can you repeat that?
Yeah, he has a lot of information to say, and for me, I like to re-listen to Hal, and I'm glad we have that opportunity over here
Yeah.
by rebroadcasting. Absolutely. Yeah. He airs, of course, live, and then we get a re-listen through the week, which for me, repetition is the only way to learn. So, especially when the information's complex. Jules presents a lot of information. There's no way to take all that in, but it takes he does a lot of great research.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I think UCY really what we're doing here is examining information and taking a closer look and getting a better idea of actually how we operate and how the world operates. And a lot of people will say, there's conspiracy behind the scenes in this new world order, which is an old world order, of course. But even if you don't have to nail all the names down and the operations, but it's clear to see that it operates, and it's a well-oiled machine. It moves by its own volition at this point. So the idea is let's look at where we are right now in history and how these things work. And a lot of people would say, let's jam the gears and shut it down. But if let's take, for instance, the police or the military. If we segregate ourselves from one another, we're defeating. So it's what we have to do is take a closer look, and hopefully by sharing information, other people can take another view too of beyond their own paradigm. Mm-hmm. And so what we hope to do is then take control of the machine and not shut it down all at once, because an implosion then would just be utter chaos. Revolution, violence in the streets is never a good idea, any examination of history. So if we wrestle control of the machine and then redirect, the output, that's where I'm at, where I've been led to believe where we can affect the change at. Mm-hmm. So if that means entering in good people into a political system, then hopefully we could do that at the lower levels, at the municipality, the county, and the city levels. Be an influence. Don't stand in opposition to everything, but also try to take and be a part of, and get the information that we have and be able to share that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand your point of view. I don't agree with you, though. I don't think...
I don't either, to be honest.
You don't either? Okay, because
no.
I think it can be done from within the system, This is their game, and no matter how we play this, we always lose. If you try to get in a better politician, they get assassinated.
Yeah, that's true. I see the fallacy in my statements. Don't think I don't. But, like I said, I think anybody that's doing something is in a positive, at least it goes in that direction. So I'm not going to knock anybody for what they do, how they approach it. That's all goes back to, of course, Larkin Rose and talking about freedom and self-ownership. And sometimes, people have a little different perspective of where they're at in the operation of things, and so we have to allow each person that freedom also.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody in the chat said he doesn't. Let's see where if I can. Here, I'm suspicious of people who are anti-state but not anti-corporation.
The corporation is the state, and that's how it operates. And
Yeah,
so,
I was figuring out also how to separate the two. You know,
well, you
it's
really,
possible.
yeah, government really is the greatest superstition, and it needs to be done away with. And a self-ownership, and because of the corporation of the nation, the state, scarcities exist. All the problems stem from that, and it's all necessary for the government to have control. I hate to use these words of government or whatever, and trying to restrain it to that one certain aspect because it is so complex, like an octopus. That corporatocracy has all these tentacles that are far-reaching and interlaced into every aspect of society, and that's control. And that's so when we go in and lop off each one of those one at a time, that's the idea right there. By taking control, wrestling control of the machine and getting in there and chopping off each of those tentacles, and on each one of those tentacles, they're suckers, So there's a lot to address. It's very far-reaching and very gripping, the entirety of it.
Yeah, like I don't agree with the fact that corporations are persons before the law, right?
Certainly not.
And
that's just another means of their control.
Yeah, but I do think that people should be able to make money any way they please.
Certainly.
Right?
Yeah.
If you can write a book, a New Age book, for instance, and you manage to sell 1 or 2 million copies to mindless zombies, you should be able to do that.
As long you do anything you want to, as long as you're not violating the self-ownership of anybody else or anything else. That's how I would sum it up.
So I think I'm not against business, so to speak, right?
No, but business in general exists through the corporation, the partnership between state and the business, and one props up the other. Lobbyists, and then the license and fines are so small by these big corporations that it pays to go ahead and pollute and violate. Whereas if I was to go dump oil on the ground, I would be fined some great number that to me would be astronomical.
Did you hear that Fox clip I played?
I did.
Yeah, that's an example of how it goes wrong, right?
Right.
So that I can understand when he says, well, he's suspicious of people that are anti-government but not anti-corporation, right?
Exactly. They fail to realize it goes hand in hand. Looks like we're coming up to the end, Walter. I appreciate you having me on. I love your show. You're also a great teacher, one that I enjoy a great deal, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for calling.
Right on. Love and peace, y'all.
Take care, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Yes, he's right. So, I'm going to thank everybody in the chat. Anon, Del, Hecty, Joe, Jules, Road Dog, Vincent, Listener, Cap Gringo, and one Anon. I'll be back next week. I'm not sure what I'm going to do then. I don't know, maybe some mythology or something.
And we are, as a people, inherently and
Just don't know yet. So,
opposed to secret societies.
listen to what Huxley says about humans.
I think a new world order is emerging.
Take care, everybody.
Look inside, John. How dare you? How dare you?
to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific process.